I'm Michael Turton, and I'm here with another episode of Taiwan Context. I'm sitting here today with Tobie Openshaw, whom I've known on Facebook for a century, I think.
It's been a long time, yeah.
Well, we've never actually met in person until today. But Tobie's one of these people that I've followed for many years. He first came to my attention with the Betelnut Girls stuff that he had done years ago, and then later as a cameraman for Discovery and National Geographic and other stuff here. And we were on the same show with Michelle at FTV for a while.
That's right, yeah.
And now he's working on indigenous issues, and we're going to talk about all these things today. I just want to say how delighted I am to have him here on the show today. He's been one of these people that I've really admired over the years.
Oh, thank you very much. And I can say the same for you, Michael. The work that you do, the stuff that you write gets out there and it gets noticed and it makes a difference. So I've certainly been following you for all these years too.
Thank you very much. So I guess we have to start at the beginning. What brought you here? Where are you from? All that good stuff.
I was brought to Taiwan by airplane. It's my standard joke, sorry. And if you can imagine, I always make sort of like flappy motions with my hands when I do that.
You're talking to a guy who loves bad jokes.
Yeah, so. There you go, sorry. But basically what brought me here was poverty and crime in South Africa. You know, so I grew up in South Africa. I lived in Namibia for 6 years. But South Africa was, it was just post-Mandela time, so it was very exciting in many ways, but also the crime and the economy was getting really, really bad. And so I had an opportunity. Some friends of mine were already in Taiwan. They were like, come on over, it's great. Come and teach English. So like most other people, I started, thankfully for only 1 year, teaching English to kindergarten in Taiwan. You know.
Yeah, I did that too. I got out, thankfully, 1 year.
Yeah. But so I was very lucky. After that, I started working. I got a job as an editor for a kids' English magazine that I did for a while. I also started picking up again my camera work and documentary film work that I was doing in South Africa before. Then I also had a day job at Corel, or first ULEAD, and that became Corel, the software company.
Yeah.
So I was working on photo editing and video editing software. So, it was in my field of interest. My pattern is I have a day job that I can stand, that I like, that it's okay. But my documentary film work then is really mostly just passion projects that are not really about the money.
Yeah, that's how I work too. Yeah. Got to have stable income, and that kind of stuff just doesn't pay very stably.
Right.
How did you get started in that?
In film, well, I kind of drifted into it. I was actually, from university days, I was into theater. And then I worked for the National Theatre of Namibia. It happened to be that I was interviewed a lot there for what was going on in the theater, but I started getting more and more interested in what the guys behind the camera was doing, and just talking to them and so on. And then at some point, I got a cheap old VHS camcorder, and I really taught myself, reading up on it. This is pre-internet days. Then I got an opportunity with a friend who was leaving Namibia, and he had like a small studio, and he asked me to run it for a bit. I also had a very good mentor who was with a company called TITV. I'm sorry, TITV is the Taiwan Indigenous Television. That was INTV. And we did wildlife stuff for Discovery channel. And so that was really where I got started with professional work. Yeah.
Wow. And then when you came over here, we started working on documentaries. What was the first things that you were looking at?
Well, so certainly the first thing when I drove into Taoyuan from the airport were the Betelnut Girls, right?
Right, in those days. Yeah.
And my friend was who drove me in was like, I'm like, are those prostitutes? He's like, no, they just sell betel nut, it's and I'm like, what the hell? So I got really interested in that topic because it's so unique. It's so very Taiwan. It's so very not South Africa. Right. A girl sitting scantily clad by the side of the road in South Africa will be assaulted within the hour. But, in the beginning, everybody said, oh, it's run by gangsters, and they actually are prostitutes, behind the scenes, and you've got to be careful who you talk to and that kind of thing. So I was very curious and very fearful at first, but slowly but surely, I started just covering these girls' stories, like who are they, why are they doing this, and sort of trying to look at the deeper social issues around it.
Yeah.
Of course, many people called me a perv, but so be it. and so I initially wanted to do a documentary film about that, but Nat Geo rejected it. Mostly it was because Taiwan did not want to promote Betelnut Girl culture as a part of its tourism attractions. You know?
Right.
So, which is fair enough.
Right.
But it then kind of modified into a more of a long-term photo project. So I realized I had enough photos to make an exhibition, which is much cheaper than making a film, because back in those days, it was before we had the DSLR and the high definition cameras that you can buy for really cheaply now, you know.
Yeah.
So the first stuff I shot about Betelnut Girls was on Betacam, and I had to rent that camera at $1,000 a day, you know.
Wow.
Yeah. Making it into a photo exhibition and a photo project became much easier. And so, yeah, so over time, I sort of became known as Mr. Betelnut Girl in Taiwan. With that came also responsibility, you know, to try to present them fairly, and who are they and why do they do this, and looking at the social issues, and obviously looking at the health issues of Betelnut as well.
Sure.
I managed to be interviewed and got consulted on a lot of projects from photographers and other channels about this topic in Taiwan.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
And then you moved on to Discovery and National Geographic. And
So just to be clear, I never worked for any of those channels. They don't actually generally hire crew themselves.
Right.
So how it works is that production companies will pitch a documentary or documentary series to those channels. And then if they're accepted, then that production company gets the budget, they produce it, and they give it to Nat Geo or Discovery, and they broadcast it.
I see.
So yeah, just to be clear. So one of the first things I did for them was by a company called Brightside Productions, I think it was, from the UK, and that was about a shipwreck down in Kending. There was a ship that had gone aground there during a typhoon.
Yeah, I remember
and
that.
They were trying to refloat it. And that was a whole long, drawn-out story. In the end, the salvage company, it was for a series called Salvage Code Red. In the end, as they were getting ready to refloat it, they had the bags in the hold already and everything. Typhoon Morakot came over.
Yeah.
And basically filled the hull with sand again. And the whole thing was just like stuck. So eventually the Taiwan government said, no, we can't do this anymore. We can't wait for this. We need to get this thing off the coral reefs there. Old coral, but still. And so they had a company actually destroy it in situ. They salvaged it. They just cut it up into pieces right there. The other really cool piece I did was also for Nat Geo, and that was about the funeral pole dancers in Taiwan.
Oh, yes, I remember that one.
Right. So nowadays you see girls dancing on jeeps and so on. It's sort of become a thing again.
Sure.
But back then it was mostly with funerals. Well, that was still getting rare at that time too. But yeah, we covered a real gangster funeral down in Changhua. And this guy had the works. It was a huge truck full of ghost money that they burned for him. And all the cardboard, a house and a club and a car and a...
all in cardboard.
all in
burnt.
cardboard that they burnt for him to take with him into the afterlife and so on. I can tell you a quick little story about that. One of the creepiest, it's being Halloween right now, okay? One of the creepiest things that ever happened to me is that we were going to start filming at 5 o'clock in the morning. They were going to take his body out of the freezer and transfer it to the coffin. So we arrived just before 5, but they'd already taken the body out. So I'd missed that crucial shot that I wanted with the thing sliding out of the refrigerator kind of thing. And then as we started filming this dead body, the camera just died for no reason. The battery was fine. The tape was fine. The camera just said, I'm not doing this. So my crew were completely spooked, and they went off to the side to try and get the camera to work again. I had my small Canon DSLR with me, and I continued shooting with that.
Uh-huh.
You know, this guy did not leave a good-looking corpse. There were kids around, and it was noisy. They were playing the gongs and going crazy.
Sure.
And there was this woman from the funeral home, and she was wearing white gloves, and she was tending to the corpse. So she was like cleaning out his ears and things, and she was trying to feed him food. You know, it was like this whole ceremony about giving him food on his journey and talking to him all the time. Grandpa, here, you must eat something now. And it was just creepy as hell.
Yes.
Right? And I'm like trying to get good shots, not be in anybody's way. And it was not a comfortable time. Anyway, so from there we went to the graveside after they'd got him into the coffin and everything. And my second cameraman, in climbing up on the truck, kicked over the second camera and broke that. So the rental guy calls up my assistant and says, you guys have to go and pray at the temple because you're bringing bad luck to my gear, you know. So I'm continuing with my camera. Finally, we get it done. It's the end of the day. I get that last shot of the son of the deceased sitting on the sidewalk, smoking a cigarette, going like, thank God that's over, because it's like a process of 4 days, you know.
Yeah, sure.
So we finally drive back, and I'm shooting without a crew for most of the day because they all spooked. They don't want to come anywhere near the graveside, you know. What I need now is a massage. I want to go and lie down and just have this day like massaged out of my back. There's a massage place right across from the hotel. I go and check in. The price, yeah, it's all good. I say, okay, guys, I'll see you tomorrow. And I get in, I lie down, and the girl starts the massage, and I'm like feeling something is weird. And I look around, and she's wearing white latex gloves. And I'm just like, this morning, there was this dead body being tended to by a woman with white gloves. And here I'm now lying on a slab being manhandled by somebody with gloves. Like, why? That was just, it creeped me out so much. But, you know, my Chinese skills were such that I couldn't even actually really argue the point. So I sort of just let it go. But yeah, that was pretty creepy. But otherwise, so I've done work for Nat Geo, Discovery, then also Al Jazeera, Sky Television. I did an amazing thing about a doctor here in Taiwan who does penile reconstruction surgery. I filmed one of those, and that's also an experience I never want to have again. Al Jazeera, we did something about legalizing sex work in Taiwan. So I've certainly been around the block in terms of interesting subjects, I can tell you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'd pay money not to see the penile reconstruction one.
But the surgeon who did that surgery was very famous in Taiwan, in that he developed a certain kind of surgery to open up the blood vessels in the penis. And he did so because he had that problem. And then he taught his associate to do the procedure on him, and it didn't work. So he did the procedure on himself. So he literally had full surgery set up and everything with a nurse, and he had local anesthetic, and he sat there, and I saw the video working on his own penis, and he did it himself.
Wow. That's a pretty good recommendation for a surgical technique.
All right.
And you and I had worked with Michelle's show, that travel show at FTV for a while, and then you had a great story about being bitten by a snake on Yangmingshan.
Yeah, not on Yangmingshan, in Fulong.
Oh, in Fulong.
At the beach, yeah.
No
yeah,
way.
Yeah. They're between the area between the beach and the street there, by the temple. I was out in the nighttime filming or taking photos of the temple there, beautifully backlit and everything, and walking back towards the food bar, which my friend Etienne ran at that time. I just suddenly felt this sting on my leg. My first thought was it was a wasp. It felt I'd been stung by a wasp before. It kind of felt like that. But then I felt this thing like curling around my leg, and I just kicked it off. It was very dark. It was in the little path, but I could see it there, and it just sat there looking at me. So, many thoughts racing through my head. Do I try to kill it? Do I try to take a photo of it? But my tripod was extended, and I couldn't do that. So I decided, okay, just take a good look at it and get to help. For that moment, your thoughts also go, okay, maybe it's not really venomous, but then I saw it has that triangular viper head, You also think, okay, maybe it didn't really inject a whole lot of venom. But the next moment, I just felt this burning, absolute fire burning sensation just coming up my leg incredibly fast. I just say, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to just drive my car home tonight. This is where the Taiwan healthcare system kicks in, okay? So run across the street. By the time I get to the restaurant, and it's less than 50 meters, my leg's already dragging. It's paralyzed.
Yeah.
Right? Tell Etienne, hey, I've been bitten by a snake. He's like, okay, in here, lie down. He continues to serve customers in his restaurant because it's really busy there. But he goes around to the police station, says, my buddy's been bitten by a snake. They come back and they call an ambulance. Ambulance arrives probably 15 minutes after the bite, all right? So I get an ambulance ride to Audi, the nearest clinic there.
Yeah.
It's a free ambulance. It's a volunteer ambulance service, all right? So free ambulance ride to Audi. Arrive there. They show me a booklet with photos, and I say, okay, right, it's definitely that snake. They say, okay, guy, we got it. It's the Taiwan Guekehua, or the habu. It's a family is of the pit viper family. So the venom attacks your tissues and your blood. So I kind of knew I wasn't going to die. But I was worried I was going to lose my foot or my leg, because I have seen, especially in South Africa, people bitten by vipers where the wound never heals, they get gangrene, and they lose a foot or a leg or a hand or something. You know, so that was my main concern. It was extremely painful. It really is incredibly painful. Anyway, so at the clinic in Audi, they give me a antivenom injection, and I had to pay for that, 7,000 NT, because I didn't have my health card on me. So then they put me into the ambulance again and say, to Geelong with you. So go to Geelong Veterans or General Hospital there. And there I stayed for a week. I got another 2 antivenom injections and antibiotics for the whole week, you know, just like pouring into it. I was seen by a occupational therapist and a physical therapist, you know, various people in and out. The doctor who first treated me, when I saw him, I thought he looked pretty young. I was like, how many of these have you done before? And he's like, oh, about 5. Okay, that's fine. You know, that's experience enough for me, you know. At the end of that week in hospital, my leg swelled up like almost twice its size. So there was talk about having to cut it open to relieve the pressure and blah, blah, blah. But thank God it didn't get to that. At the end of that week, the total bill was about 55,000 Taiwan dollars. But I had my health card by that time, so my copay was 5,000 NT.
Yeah.
Then a couple of weeks later, I was on crutches for a week and on a stick for another 2-3 weeks. But I went back to the clinic in Audi, showed my health card, and I got a refund of my 7,000 NT right there. When I got to my office, back to work, they said, oh, we have additional insurance at this company. You can claim 2,000 NT for every day you were in the hospital. So all considered, in Taiwan, after having been bitten by a snake, fully treated, spent a week in a hospital, I was 5,000 NT ahead. So yay Taiwan healthcare, you know.
I can't say enough good things about it.
Yeah.
So recently you've shifted to working on indigenous issues. Where, what, who, how?
Yeah. So when I was living in Namibia, I dealt with and did some documentary work about water in the desert, things like that. And I got into contact with some of the indigenous people there, the Khoi people and so on, who live in the desert. I had read about their stories and so on from as a child already. Meeting with these people.
I understand you've been working more recently on indigenous issues.
Yeah. Growing up in South Africa, I read many stories about like the San or the Khoi people who lived in the Kalahari Desert. And when I lived in Namibia...
Stop. Can you do their click?
Actually, the clicks that I can do is Kosa, right?
Yeah.
Kosa.
Yeah.
But traveling through Namibia and shooting there are some of the tribes, like the Nama people, have 5 clicks.
Oh my God.
And so they literally, I filmed the kids sitting in the classroom practicing their clicks. And they do a in the back of their cheek and a under the tongue, under the teeth, and then like this, something like that, like right there. Like, so it's not easy, but and especially if you're not used to it or practiced, you know. So I always have to like marshal my mouth a little bit if I want to do that.
Anyway,
but no. Okay, so I was flying around Namibia in a helicopter doing this documentary about water research and so on, and stopping at these communities and talking to these people, and it was really amazing. Then I came to Taiwan, and it took me a while to actually realize there was an indigenous community in Taiwan, and starting to read about it and talk about it, I began to realize that, wow, it sounds like these people have the same kind of problems that indigenous people in South Africa had. Like the San Bushmen, for instance, they were excellent trackers. They were hired by the South African Defence Force as trackers. They were given modern clothes alcohol, tobacco, sleeping in tents. Then when the war was over and the military withdrew, they were just told, okay, thanks, bye, with no social safety net or direction for them to go or whatever. So basically yanked them out of their traditional land, tribal lands and traditional way of life, and then just abandoned them.
Right.
There were several people who were trying to work on dealing with that kind of issue. So coming here and hearing about colonial power coming in, destroying culture, destroying language, and people now trying to reclaim that, I realized was a very common story around the world. My friend Sean, his wife is Saisha from the Saisha tribe up in Ufong. I went and attended my first Basta'ai ritual, which is every 2-year ritual that the Saisha people do. And in fact, the next one is in November the 19th now, this month. That'll be my 5th. So it's done every 2 years. So it's been 10 years that I've been doing this. So I started doing documentaries, short little bits here and there about this topic and learning more and more about it.
What kind of documentary did you do? Can you give me an example?
So about the Basta'ai, this festival,
yeah.
I did a short piece about that. A lot of it is just inserts about various topics, but the main one is, which I picked up myself and fully funded and everything by myself, is about the apology that the President Tsai made to the indigenous people 5 years ago now. I heard this was going to happen. I got a crew together. We attended the apology day. I was very surprised to see a group of people protesting in the street. I thought everybody was going to be happy now, and realized that no, these things are complicated and there are groups and factions that want one thing or others want another thing, or some people think this isn't going far enough and that kind of thing. So it's a very complex situation, and it's now been really fascinating to try and follow that and document it. As people complain, rightfully, that documentary filmmaking and academic anthropology, these kind of things are done primarily by old white men.
Right.
And so I have to realize and recognize the fact that I'm an old white man, and that I need to be very sure about where I place myself in this narrative. I struggled for a long time when I was working on the apology documentary about whose voice is this going to be. So I thought at some point, I need an indigenous person who can be the voice of the film. But then I realized that basically I'm making the film, but I'm now sort of just putting a figurehead there and saying, this is now your voice, and while it's not authentically so.
Right.
Number one. Number two, also, everybody I know in the indigenous community are some kind of activist or something in some way, and have their own agendas, and have also their own groups of people who don't want to follow what they're into, So I kind of walked it back to, I guess it's going to have to be, this is me as an outsider. So use my outsider status, saying this is me as an outsider coming in and seeing what's happening. This is what these people say, and then have them say it. And this is what this other group says, and have them say it in their own words. That's the only way that I see that I can bring it together.
Right.
My work on that documentary, which remains unfinished, I'm going to finish it for the 5-year anniversary. That's next year, August.
Sure.
Together with the work that I did about the sunflower movements, have gathered me quite a bit of interest, and I was invited to do a talk on those two talks at SOAS in London, the School for Oriental and African Studies, their Taiwan School of Taiwan Studies. I did that in 2018. It was a fantastic experience. Since then, I've given those same talks at Academia Sinica here in Taipei. The sunflower one, we started at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. At 7, the security guards came and chased us out because people were still talking and asking questions. And there were a couple of, struggle stalwarts there. And so I would say, when I came here, this is what I saw and this is what I observed. And then somebody in the audience would say, no, that's not how it was. We actually did this and this and this. And, as a researcher and a documentarian, I don't see that as an attack or anything at all. I go, thank you very much for that input, So it was an amazing dialogue that was going on there. I was also approached by UCLan, the University of Central Lancashire, which is up in Preston in the north of England. been very honored to be invited to be a affiliated research fellow with their School of Austronesian Studies.
They have a School of Austronesian Studies.
Or a Center for Austronesian Studies. Sorry, it's a Center for Austronesian Studies, again within their School of Taiwan Studies.
Cool.
Or department. I'm never clear on that. And so I went there last year and also gave a talk there that went down really, really well. I was going to do more documentary projects for them. Then it was sort of like I would be a returning practitioner, right? I'm not really an academic yet, although I am starting on my master's, but I'm a practitioner. So I was going to come back regularly and present documentary projects. They are interested in topics like indigenous people and climate change, for instance,
Right.
So,
have you noticed that? Is that on the radar of local indigenous activists?
yes, not as much as one would think.
Right.
And the effects are not very obvious in Taiwan. Sort of just looking like that. But what people are saying are things like animals that would stay above a certain altitude are now coming down lower.
Yeah.
They're saying that it's not a general warming that's going on here. It's just bigger spikes. So it's very warm, then very cold, so that the extremes are getting higher.
Yeah.
And then there's a shift in season. So back in the day, the indigenous people would plant the millet at a time when the birds were sitting on their eggs, so that where the millet would grow bigger and be ready for harvest almost by the time the chicks grew up and started eating millet. So they literally timed it according to the cycles of birds nesting in order to protect their harvest of millet. Now they say the birds are nesting earlier and therefore their millet harvest is now again at risk. But the millet is man-planted, so it's not that easy to adjust that. And the millet planting and harvesting is all in a cycle in the rest of the year that it has to do with lunar cycle, has to do with rituals and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things that we are seeing. But I try to zoom in or hone in on a smaller part of the topic. And the topic that came up, people often ask me, how do you find your topics? It's like my topics find me.
Exactly.
They bubble up and then it's like, oh yeah, let me follow this rabbit hole,
Right.
And so the rabbit hole that I'm currently in is about indigenous hunting rights.
Oh yeah, that's a huge one.
Yes. So it's an ongoing conversation right now. There are representations made to government right now. And the point is that hunting is a nexus, pulls together issues of land rights, issues of language and culture, tradition, and autonomy. So the word autonomy is very much a part of the conversation at the moment. So indigenous people don't all agree. Not everybody agrees on what autonomy means or what it looks like.
Right.
But it deals with things like, okay, our territory, it used to be where the Skaroo National Park is right now, for instance, the Shui Park. We want to have the right to go in there. We want to have the right to entry. We want to have the right to, be given the right. We want to reclaim the right that we always had that was taken away from us. These distinctions are very important. To hunt there, to have temporary abodes there. So like build a house out of bamboo. We agree, okay, we're not going to build a new town out of concrete there, all right?
Right.
But, like my friend La Ling, who's very much a hunting activist, says, when I am on the mountain as an indigenous man, I am not on the mountain as a carbuncle, as something that disrupts the mountain. I am of the mountain.
Yeah.
I belong there. I fit into it. I am a part of it. And the way that I walk, the way that I move through the mountain, the way that I hunt, the animals I see, the plants that I take for my food, those things are all completely natural part of the cycle of the mountain,
Yeah.
So it's been a really, really interesting journey talking about hunting, because also the other issue is about the guns that people use.
Right.
So in Taiwan, indigenous people are allowed to hunt, but they have to use handmade muzzle-loading guns. They're not allowed to buy any kind of commercial firearm.
Right.
And so that is a conversation that's ongoing right now. And I've actually been asked to consult on a committee about gun laws because I was in South Africa. I was into competitive shooting. I was a member of the South African Gun Owners Association that talked about legislation and stuff. I'm not a redneck gun owner. I'm a very liberal gun owner, but a former gun owner nevertheless. So I'll be talking in that committee just about what we did in South Africa. I don't presume to tell Taiwan indigenous people how to have their gun laws, but I can tell them how things worked in South Africa and what about it worked well and what did not. So on that level. So I've been talking to some really, really fascinating people who do amazing work in forestry. A friend of mine, a woman who's doing work on hunting, trap cameras. So she has a series of cameras through the mountain that will record when animals go past it. So
Sure.
she can do counts. And then Professor Pei down south.
Curtis Pei,
right?
Yeah.
And he has been working for several years now on starting a hunting association. The association tells the government, we will run according to, Gaya or Gaga, the tribal rules.
Right.
But then we want to have the right to police ourselves.
Right.
And the government is now saying, okay, we accept that and we can understand that and we will accept your undertaking that the resources will be protected. But you need to report whatever you take, whether it's trapping or shooting. Then they had like a line group, where people would post a photo of the animal they've just shot, and they would send that to Professor Pei, and then he would analyze. And then I said, but come on, this is 2020, let's make a phone app. And I actually got one of my students at Taipei American School to start the design of a phone app, which Professor Pei and his IT people have now taken up and done more about. But yeah, so the idea is the hunter will take a photo with his phone. It will immediately pull down the exact GPS location, the altitude. It will pull data from the nearest weather station, so very local weather.
Right.
And then the hunter will just click a button for the species, male or female, pregnant or not pregnant, whatever. You can put any number of data in there as long as it's not too onerous for the person to do it, right?
Right.
Because you have to convince people to do it. Anyway, so after a year, you can have a really useful set of data that you can plot where, what species, what season, that kind of thing. Just last weekend, we had a conference. There was a conference in Alishan, and a group of hunting associations all came there, and Professor Pei presented this app to them. And response was pretty positive, So there are definitely the elders of the community and the leaders of the associations all say, we have to work together with the government. This is not something where we can sort of draw a line in the sand and try to act like we already have that autonomy that we're looking for. But there are certainly some more of the sort of activist types who are saying, no, I'm not going to tell the government anything. Why should I? This is just another way that they want to try to control us, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So we're looking at about a 50% acceptance rate at this point for people to report, and we're hoping to push that up. But Professor Pei is happy to give that another 2-3 years for people to see the benefits. And the other conversation, of course, which is now becoming all over the world with all indigenous groups, is about data sovereignty.
Yes.
So researchers come into your community, they tell you something that they're going to be doing for research. You sign off on it, right? So we have this process called FPIC, right? For free, prior, and informed consent.
Yeah.
And then researchers gather data and then they disappear. And that community never sees what really became of that data, who had access to it, what follow-on was done from it, that kind of thing. So whenever I'm working on any of these projects or documentary stuff and so on, I'm always very, very careful to tell people what it's going to be and to have a contact that I can keep in touch with in future to say this is what's happening with this material. So for the hunting data from the cell phones, for instance, the current conversation is there will be mini servers. There'll be a sort of a plug-and-play device that we can get sponsored for, and it will go to the village elder, like a Li Jiang, or maybe the hunting association leader, and the data will sit on there. Then they will have the power or the access to give just the necessary data to the government. The government is only asking for species and numbers. And then the bona fide researcher has access to the full set of data. nobody should have access to modify the data.
Right.
Because we don't want people to be able to go in there and say, oh, that animal that I shot, I think I should rather remove it from the database kind of thing, because the integrity of the data has to be maintained as well. Look, I can talk about this for the day. It's really just fascinating stuff. The people I'm meeting, such variety, and it's just a privilege for me to just be somewhat involved in this side of what's the very exciting things that are happening in Taiwan right now.
Well, it's a privilege for us to be able to sit here and listen. Before the show, you had mentioned a music festival that you were hoping to put together.
Yeah, that's right. So my friend Sean and I are working on what we're calling the Skaroo Cross-Pollination.
P-O-L-Y Nation.
That's right, yeah. Music and cultural festival. The idea is we want to connect or help Taiwanese to connect with their indigenous community, the indigenous community to connect with their Polynesian, Austronesian brothers across the Pacific Ocean, and also for foreigners in Taiwan, expats, long-term or short-term people here, to get a bit more closer to experiencing Taiwan indigenous culture.
Right.
So the idea is to have a music festival where we have expat bands, indigenous bands, and performances from the rest of Pacifica. So we already have some people from the Solomon Islands who are going to perform. We have some dancers, a dance troupe who can do Hawaiian hula, Tahiti dance, Fiji dance, those kind of things. We're going to have a Maori haka, and we hope to have a mass haka where we teach everybody how to do the haka and film that. And we'll have cultural events and workshops surrounding this, and we hope to have a weekend event up in Qingchuan in the Ufeng Mountains. People can come and camp there for a weekend and have just an outstanding cross-cultural experience up there.
Wow, that sounds fantastic. I'm looking forward to attending.
So thank you very much for having me on. It was a pleasure talking to you.
It's been a pleasure listening to you. Thank you.
This has been brought to you by the Taiwan Report. For more content like this, become our patron at report.tw.
哎呦，就是那个台湾狗啦，最喜欢我的台湾狗了。